There is a certain tragic occurrence when it comes to characters in video games, especially those with a wide selection of them such as gachas. Through circumstance, future planning, or lack thereof, whatever the reason, one unit can improve in strength, usefulness, and versatility while another may be neglected or decline in those various fields. As I've talked about before, there is no shortage of characters in Genshin Impact with excellent potential in design and/or power that have not been tapped into yet, which has made them appear less favorable to the average person. One such character that I've been reluctant to talk about up until recently was Arataki Itto, a very rambunctious, larger-than-life individual who came in almost 2 years ago with a breadth of latent potential that has only been squandered over time, and seems to be at a breaking point, especially with a certain Geo character seeming to take what little he has left away from him. So for this episode of Why No One Plays, we'll be talking about Itto and how he was dealt such an unlucky hand. For many of you watching, the factors that contribute to Itto's poor situation are self-explanatory that need not be elaborated on, but I still think it's worth mentioning because, like I said in the beginning, Itto has, or rather had, a lot of potential. He's someone who by all accounts should have been one of the best in the game in a vacuum, and yet comes off as barely viable nowadays, even if in the past he was a decent choice. More importantly, he's the perfect example of how all the innate strength in the world has little innate value if you're missing the other half of the puzzle. Itto's the main DPS unit, also referred to as an on-field attacker. He spends most of his time buffing his attack strength and hacking away at anything that moves. Pretty typical of a greatsword user, as most of its members aren't really known for this supportive faculty. Prevailing Wisdom understands main damage dealers having to compete against each other for market share even if they don't have the same element or playstyle, due to there being only one slot available per team. When he first came out, his numbers were quite impressive, having many ways for him to boost his own damage and a rather intuitive playstyle to boot. This also coincided around the time when actual attention was being given to Geo, since apart from Zhongli and Albedo, Geo was entirely neglected in version 1. Unfortunately for him, the brief stint with himself, Goro, and Yunjin was pretty much all that would come for the Geo elements before it got thrown back out for the entirety of version 3. And that's also what leads us to the first big issue affecting his decline in popularity. He kinda got power cracked. Itto's claim to fame is a simple one: brute force. Not really known for its reactions, the Mono Geo team funnels as much raw strength into a character as possible, and Itto is the best candidate for that on account of being the only 5-star on-field Geo character prior to Navia. Back when his only real competition was Raiden National or Ayaka/Ganyu, he actually put up a decent fight against other on-field attackers, mostly because they don't have the same baseline that he does. Such is no longer the case anymore. The inclusion of Yelan and subsequent rise of Double Hydro granted Hu Tao a major boost in power, not to mention Yelan's ability to augment the damage of pretty much anyone. Meanwhile, in version 3, C6 Farazan made Shao, another brute force carry, skyrocket from near irrelevance to one of the best hyper-carry teams in the game. Though not exactly brute force oriented, other on-field attackers like Kotsing were given some much needed attention by having an actual team to play with, incidentally resulting in there being more reaction teams with impressive damage floors that can compete or outscale Itto as well. Since version 3 was the era of reactions, the only brute force teams that could survive were those who could keep up as closely as possible. Itto's Mono Geo team was just barely holding on at that point. One would think that with version 4 bringing on-field damage back into relevance, Itto would also come back. Ironically, however, it only made things worse for him. To start, the first 3 featured 5-stars were all on-field damage dealers: Linny, Nuvilat, and Risley, adding even more competition for Itto, who was already finding it hard to stand out against the existing roster before him. Further exacerbating his situation was the inclusion of Furina, who unexpectedly not only would further amplify the strength of the vast majority of units in the cast, but even make his 4-star rival Noelle exceed him, as she can make better use of and drive Furina's damage buffs more efficiently than him. That's not to say Itto can't also use Furina, we'll talk about that in just a moment, but Noelle's more self-sufficient gameplay can save her a party slot, which has only been getting increasingly more important in this day and age. In other words, not only did he get power crept by reaction teams raising the bar on achievable damage floors, but he also got power crept in the brute force department, either through new challengers or existing competitors getting retroactively buffed. He was valuable out of there simply not being that many options back in the day, but now there's an overwhelming abundance of ways to deal damage from both 4 and 5 stars. And Itto himself hasn't been able to keep up. Adding insult to injury, Navia is here, and though technically she has the potential to be used as a quick swap DPS thanks to her elemental burst working off-field, her elemental skill and subsequent attack empowerment through her passive talents heavily imply that she too is a brute force attacker, a more efficient brute force attacker at that. It's bad enough that Noelle, a 4-star character, can compete with Itto thanks to Furina, but now there's a new girl in town, forcing him to deal with boomers and zoomers at the same time. Some of you might try to argue that Noelle and Navia can't be compared to Itto since Itto is Mono Geo while those two actively make use of other elements, which is true. Navia's passive talent explicitly discourages going Mono Geo so she can get more attack. But if we go by the original focus of brute force, there are just so many new and better options now, which actually segues nicely into the next problem. The second issue affecting his popularity lies within his niche of Mono Geo. In the eyes of most players, especially free-to-plays, Mono Geo is just not worth it. The reason units like I'll Hate Them, Shogun, Hutao, Child, etc. are so popular is because their teams are agnostic. If you're using Xingqiu for Raiden National, you can bring him over for Double Hydro. If you're using Bennett and Xiangling for Child International, you can bring them over to Raiden National. If you're using Fischl for I'll Hate Them, you can use Fischl for Nahida, or for Ayato, or for anyone who remotely needs Electro. These units can share supports. Itto, on the other hand, cannot, or rather doesn't exactly draw from that same pool of units, meaning you have to make entirely new ones, one such case being Goro. I'm willing to bet you my mother's breakfast that the only people on this planet who have Goro leveled up and geared up are those who play Itto. The rest of us? No. There's legitimately no reason whatsoever for anyone to use Goro unless they have Itto or Noel, and prior to Furina, Noel was even less popular than Itto. In other words, any prospective Itto main would not only have to go through the trouble of leveling him up, but they also have to work on Goro, build him up and stuff. Next, the usual third character for Itto's Mono Geo team is Albedo, another character that, outside of Shell, you likely would never have pulled for, let alone equip and gear up. So you have to go out of your way to pull for and farm hyper-specific units that have very little, if any, usability outside the context of Geo teams. Actually, now with Vars on, I don't think you really need to use Albedo anymore for Shell anyway. Point being, Mono Geo team has an incredibly high investment floor. You need at minimum 3 characters to build from scratch. That alone is a lot to ask for. Of course, if the payoff is extremely good, then it's worth the trouble, right? And for a time, it was. See, Mono Geo's insularity used to be its main selling point in that Itto didn't have to steal from any of the other meta teams. For example, one team could go Raiden National, the other can be Itto. One team could go Freeze, the other can be Itto. He doesn't need Bennett, Xiangling, Xingqiu, Fischl, Kazuha, any of them, which is what made him somewhat appealing. Now, however, there are so many teams and so many characters you can go that in the off chance they gave a Spiral Abyss floor 13, 14, and 15 that required 3 parties, you'd still have plenty of units to go for. So from the perspective of a longtime player or a whale who has access to a lot of characters, the selling point of Mono Geo being self-sufficient from a character standpoint isn't anything special anymore. And from the perspective of a new player or a free-to-play, the idea of spending that much just to get one team is kind of a hard sell for Itto. Moreover, Mono Geo has a high floor, but it also has a low ceiling too, as he doesn't benefit that much from vertical investment compared to other characters. Hypothetically, if you were ambitious enough to get into Max Constellation, that same amount of resources and pulls on someone else would net you far more results. It bears repeating that Itto's gameplay is brute force, particularly against a single enemy. Single target brute force can be achieved by so many characters. Yes, he's to this day the only one who runs Mono Geo, but since Mono Geo is ultimately just brute force, it can therefore be compared to non-Mono Geo teams that also run brute force. Hutao, Shao, Wanderer, Linny, Nuvalet, Shogun Hyper K, any team whose sole purpose is just raw damage. Maybe with the exception of Animal Hyper K, the other teams have units you've likely already built and can be used in others, making them easier to tap into. Though I'll Hate Them isn't exactly a brute force attacker as talked about last week, what makes him so popular is how soon off the shelf you can use him and how broken he is. Itto takes a lot of investment just to get started, and even then, he gets outcompeted by a lot of other characters. All of this wouldn't be the case if Itto just had an actual team, bringing us to his final issue. Itto doesn't really have a team. Remember in the beginning when I talked about how you can have all the innate strength in the game, but if you're missing the rest of the equation, there's no point? This is the other half of the equation. Itto's base numbers are fucking cracked. If we look at his numbers, he's a Gigachad, insanely high normal attack scaling on a character who uses normal and charge attacks. Not only that, but he's a hybrid scaler, gaining ridiculous amounts of attack based on his defense thanks to his elemental burst. At rank 10, it's virtually a 1-to-1 conversion. If you have 5,000 defense, it becomes 5,000 attack. Plus, Itto's Kasagiri attacks get more damage based on 35% of his defense, giving him even more power. Plus, he gets bonus attack speed from his elemental burst and other passive talent, and he can spam charge attacks without exhausting stamina through stacks of superlative strength. This man has the perfect attack-based kit. High damage that can get even higher, high attack speed, solid uptime on his geo attacks, and good staying power on account of not worrying about stamina consumption. In addition, Redhorn Stone Thrasher is a fantastic weapon, insane crit damage, insane boost to your basic attacks. This man has the perfect set of things required to perform, except the most important one. He doesn't have a team to capitalize on it. Itto's Mono Geo team is the only team he can run simply because there's no other option for him, and even then, Mono Geo suffers from a lot of issues. Albedo doesn't really do anything for Itto, he's just there for the sake of being an easy swap out damage dealer and battery since Goro doesn't give that much energy. The elemental mastery he offers has no effect on Itto, and Itto doesn't care about geo constructs or plunging attacks. Otherwise, Albedo is only there to satisfy Goro's geo quota, and that's about it. Zhongli, who is usually the 4th geo character, is also not really that efficient. The reason you feel Zhongli is because in tandem with Geo Resonance you can achieve 40% Geo Shred, which can help out Itto's damage quite a bit, but it's common knowledge these days that Zhongli is a huge DPS cut for most teams in exchange for more stability and survivability. For top tier teams like Double Hydro or Novalet, you can afford to run Zhongli because the other 3 units do so much damage as it is. Though Itto certainly benefits from being invincible, since he already has innate stagger resistance, he's not as dependent on super armor compared to someone like Yoimiya or C0 Novalet who live and die by it. Tier 0 teams use Zhongli because they can afford the DPS cut for more consistency. Itto in his current state cannot afford to waste any bit of damage. That leaves Itto with just one character, Goro. Goro is the only optimal teammate for Itto. That's not good enough. Most hypercarry brute force teams require at least 2 dedicated supports to function correctly. Huntao needs Yelan and Xingqiu, Xiao needs Bennett and Farazan, Novalet needs Fischl and Kazuha or Fischl and Genie if you're running Farina and your Novalet is C1. Ayaka Shinhe and Kazuha. What else? Linny has Bennett Kazuha, you get the idea. Itto has Goro. That's it. He doesn't have that second support. Why not Bennett? Because Bennett's entire purpose is to give attack. Itto already has like 5,000 attack, so more attack isn't nearly as good on him compared to someone who only has like 2,000. Itto can use Kazuha because you can't Sword Geo. He also can't use Nahida or Sucrose because Elemental Mastery is worthless. He can't use Mona because he was Shatter Freeze being a great sword user. What about Yelan or Farina who offer total damage? You can use them, but they can also buff everyone else. Itto has to rely on other teams' buffers to buff him because his own buffers are mediocre. He's like the younger brother who only ever gets his older siblings' hand-me-downs, never something just for him. Also, even in the case of Goro, though he's certainly a very powerful unit, other element-focused supports like Shinhe or Farazan do his job to their respective units, but with ever so slightly more coverage. For example, Farazan gives everything Xiao and Wander could ever ask for. Her elemental burst gives almost 40% bonus animal damage at rank 13, and shreds animal res by 30%. Next, she can boost the damage of Xiao and Wander based off her attack, and at C6, she gives 40% bonus crit damage to animal attacks and follow-up crowd control. She covers every possible field imaginable, which is why C6 Farazan was such a massive buff to Xiao, and she could do all of this on her own. Comparatively, Goro's buffs, while still very good, fall short in a few ways. He gives 25% bonus defense plus the flat amount, which is always good, along with giving bonus geo damage, but only 15% compared to Farazan's almost 40%, and he gives up to 40% crit damage based on how many geo units you have. The main issue is that Goro doesn't have Geo Shred or grouping, forcing you to run Zhongli if you want to achieve that 40% with Geo Resonance. Then he gives less Geo damage compared to Farazan's animal damage, and though both of them give the same amount of crit damage, Goro needs a 3rd Geo unit to achieve this, compared to Farazan who can do it all by herself. Moreover, as mentioned before, Farazan provides more things besides just buffs. Her Constellation 6 applies a small grouping follow-up to her active character, giving Xiao and Wander some much needed crowd control. So she gives everything Goro does, and then some. Not to undermine Goro's value as a character, he's still very integral and very powerful for the Geo element. It's just that he alone isn't enough to fully supply all of Itto's needs by himself. This wouldn't be much of an issue if there was a second Geo support who could buff up Itto's damage even more, but there isn't one. Itto has no team. He has the base numbers, he has the raw strength. What he needs are damage bonuses, but where can he get that? Right now, nowhere. In contrast, someone like Hu Tao's numbers are frankly worse than Itto's across the board, but she can make use of VV Pyro Shred, she can make use of Kazuha's Elemental Damage Amp, she can make use of Vaporize, she can make use of Yelan, she can take advantage of all of these other supplementary forms of DPS augmentation that Itto doesn't have access to, or at the very least, doesn't have efficient access to. If Itto received a Geo Farazan, he would be busted. This guy's being held back due to being an incomplete character, not in terms of constellations or weapons, but in terms of team. He hasn't been given the appropriate supports to realize his full potential, meanwhile everyone else, even his own 4-star rival Noelle, has gotten something to make them better or keep up with the meta. And if that wasn't bad enough, now there's Navia, who doesn't go Mono Geo but is a Geo brute force attacker, putting her directly in contention with Itto in the fields you would think to use him. Mono Geo has nothing that makes it unique. It's not like Freeze or the loss of DPS is made up for through perma-stunning enemies. Crystallize is a useless reaction. Mono Geo is for all intents and purposes no different from any other brute force team. Unless, I guess, if you count breaking shields faster. Itto got screwed, hard. It's not even his fault. He's not a bad character, far from it. He's a phenomenal one. Once more, the numbers on his base kit are almost version 4 levels of good, but he doesn't have a team, or at least a complete one. He needs new support, badly. It's been 2 years, and he hasn't gotten anything. He shares the same situation with Eula, where the two of them are super good on paper, but in practice, they haven't been given the adequate support to make the most of it. I feel bad. Itto reminds me of that comic relief character in every anime that no one ever takes seriously despite having so much power. But anyways, what do you guys think? Do you think there's something else that might be negatively affecting Itto's popularity, or do you agree with the points I made in this video? Let me know in the comments down below. For now, if you enjoyed the video, I'd appreciate it if you could leave a like and subscribe. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter at Vars, join my Discord server, and check out my other Why No One Plays episodes if you haven't yet. But till next time, thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.